Shalom everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Hebrew Nezor Haftarah series. I'm your host, Ariel Halevi, and this is the last actual recording I'm going to be doing for this series. The next Haftarah actually will be taken from the book of Joshua, from the book of Yoshua, and that I already addressed the book of Yoshua in my series on the light of the prophets, which went from the beginning of Yoshua all the way to the first half of the book of Shmuel, and hopefully, I hope one day to renew the series Light of the Prophets. It's in the plan. If possible, I hope to renew the series with my original host, I would say, but I can't really promise anything like that. Still kind of looking into what I might do. I have a few ideas. I might actually decide to just carry on, finish Light of the Prophets at least at the end of Shmuel, and then from there go into other projects. That actually might be the best thing to do. So right now, no official announcement, but probably first of all go for Light of the Prophets, finish the book of Shmuel. Book of Melachim, Book of Kings is a book that I've been studying for several years now. Hopefully I'll get into that as well. I do wish to kind of go all the way into the end of the Book of Kings, basically at least finish the first prophets, Ishayahu, Yirmiyahu, Yechezkel, all these other books. They're way too complicated to even go into in a series, but maybe one day in the future, hopefully, be possible to do that. But right now we are going to be touching on one of the minor prophets, on the Book of Zechariah. First of all, Zechariah, this is for those who didn't read the caption, this is the Haftarah for Bah'alotekha. But when recording this, by the way, there was an interesting discrepancy between land of Israel and the diaspora, because of the different dates of when we celebrate Passover, the fact that in the diaspora there's a second day for each feast day, whole history there, which I touched upon in other places as well. And there's also been comments, for example, why don't I read other types of readings as well? I usually go with the majority. I mean, throughout the entire series, because this is the last recording, throughout the entire series, I try to stick to the majority readings that exist. There are other traditions out there as well. For example, Karaites have their own reading traditions. But again, I can't address each group, and I especially can't address very small minority groups. But hopefully, maybe somewhere in another teaching that I did, or maybe in the future, I'm anyhow going to might be reading this material somewhere, and you'll be able to use that also for whatever tradition that you might adopt. So this is kind of like an explanation to those who are wondering why I'm not doing recordings. Other things, again, these are very small minority groups, and it's not worth the time to actually address each and every group. It's better just to work with what most people are doing. Also, there's been a lot of requests for Spanish recordings. Unfortunately, I don't speak Spanish. I've received this request a lot of times, and it's also been requested for me to translate papers into Spanish. And there is someone has come forward and said they want to, but we haven't really finalized anything. And but there are some things which are apparently being translated to different languages. And I know there's a person who was translating to Polish, and I want to say thank you to them if they are listening. I know there's another person who said they're taking some time to translate some of the things I do into Spanish as well, so I want to thank them as well. And again, this is if you have the ability to take an article, if you do know how to translate well from English to whatever language feel free. It's just, you have to make sure that people understand where the article came from. Unfortunately, there is this practice of taking other people's teachings and presenting them as their own. And there have been some really appalling cases where I saw where people literally took someone's a name of an article, a name of a book that someone wrote, and they present as if this is something they invented. and it's very sad that people do this. Please, make sure that you understand that we put a lot of effort into these teachings, and we're not asking for money from anyone. If you want to donate, go to HebrewInIsrael.net. You can donate there, but the main point is to give. And I've been working on this Haftarah series for a year now. Yes, there have been recordings from the past. I mean, I actually have hundreds and hundreds of hours of teachings that I'm slowly putting out. There's stuff that I've done with my Bible group, and I do release every once in a while recordings from those sessions as well. Those are very lengthy sessions as well, and they undergo some editing, but most of what you hear there is the original teaching. And I have teachings basically from Genesis all the way into Deuteronomy, each chapter analyzed in great detail as well. There's also topical subjects, and we are slowly, my wonderful editor and colleague is doing a lot of work to put this material out, and we have to, so without mentioning their name, I just want to say thank you, and I also want to say thank you to everyone for sharing, and I really hope that people enjoyed the series, and God willing, I will get to that subject. Another note, again, because this has come up as well, I always say the word God. And the reason I say God and I don't switch to Elohim is because people who do that are forgetting that what they're doing, they're actually speaking English. There's this tendency to say, oh, I'm going to use these words because, it's not this pagan word God. And when I speak English, or when I speak any language that I've studied, and there's a few of them, I would speak the language that I'm speaking. And if I'm using German, I use the word Gott, which is, by the way, the origins of the word God. It has absolutely nothing to do with the word God, or God, as it appears in the book of Daniel or in the book of Isaiah. That's a difference because of the difference in pronunciation, the phonetic pronunciation difference between British English, which is what I use, and what American English uses. But there can be dialects in it, but accents. But in England, it's God. It's an not an ah. And there's a wonderful video that I found on YouTube by a linguist who kind of explains these things. And the word God does actually come from Old High German Gottu or something like that. And it has nothing to do with the word God. There aren't too many words that traveled from Semitic languages into Indo-European languages. There are loads of Eastern words that got into Indo-European languages, but because they're called Indo-European, they used to be called Indo-Iranian or Indo-Aryan, and they stopped using the term Aryan because of very clear reasons. And these are actually, for example, in Persia, they speak Farsi, and Farsi is not a Semitic language. It's actually more related to European languages than anything else, because most Europeans are descendants of people who came from those areas. Unlike, for example, some teachings that are out there, there's some really weird teachings, and it's going to connect to everything I say here right now regarding Zechariah, because the Haftarah we're going to be reading is from Zechariah, but there's these really erroneous teachings out there, and I actually studied the history of Europe. I did my undergraduate in history, and I studied the history of Europe. Most Europeans are either Southern Europeans that moved north, or Scyths and Goths and other tribes that came from the Zagros Mountains, basically from northern Iran and so on. And for example, Iranians and Europeans they share not only languages, but also share genetics as well. And one of the mistakes that people make is because in Farsi today they write in Arabic characters, people immediately think, oh, it's a Semitic language. It actually isn't. It doesn't even follow Semitic rules. It's a completely different language. It has nothing to do with any of the Semitic languages or any of the families. There's some Persian words that got into Hebrew, but that's another discussion. But what's very, very important here to understand is that there's this need that people have to try to find their identity as Israelites, like the Ephraimite movement and things like that. And the problem is that historically speaking, none of this is real. I mean, for example, you have a lot of people that might be descendants of Jews, like, for example, people who are Hispanic. Many, there were groups of Jews who convert to Christianity, and they end up fleeing from Spain and Portugal. But again, what the numbers are exactly is a very, very good question. But the thing is that trying to find an identity that's not really your identity is part of a process been going on since the 1800s, where it started off with eccentric Europeans who were trying to be something they're not. And you can actually see it in some of the photography art that exists from back then, where dressing up as an Egyptian, or dressing up as a Babylonian, or dressing up as someone from Africa, or whatever, as a Native American, what have you. It all stems from this identity crisis that these eccentric Europeans had. And this carried on. I mean, there's been an identity crisis with a lot of social groups, especially with the postmodern world, where today people are very, very confused about who they are in overall. And in truth, Europeans, North Americans, general what we'd call Caucasians, actually do have quite a few pretty amazing cultures to be proud of, and a history that they should be proud of. Parts of it, at least, there are parts of European history that, unfortunately, we have to say you should not be proud of, especially the violence towards Jews. But one of the things is that the problem is that there's this movement that doesn't always know where it came from, and from what I've been able to gather, it's part of this. Now, identity is very, very important, especially after the exile from the land of Israel, because there was an identity war. And Zechariah is part of this discussion. So first of all, I just have to point out, I actually did a recording about identity crisis, which should be on my website. And I also did an introduction to Second Temple Jewry. And I did an introduction to Second Temple culture when it comes to Torah in my oral Torah series. So there's a whole bunch of things you can go into and listen to. They're on the website for free. People have asked me if they can download. For some reason, there's no download option as far as I know on the website, on the configuration. Hopefully, we can find a way of resolving that as well. But worst comes to worst, email me and I'll send you files. It's not really that terrible. And so the issue of identity became very, very important during the Second Temple era, because what happened was that there was an elite that was exiled during the First Temple era from the north, from the south, and they developed their own identity. So, for example, Professor Yair Hoffman came out a couple months ago with a book called Ha'te'enim HaTovot, The Good Figs. This relates to the prophecy in the book of Jeremiah. He sees a basket of good figs, a basket of bad figs, and he says the good figs are the figs who are represented by the exiles, and the bad figs are the ones left in the land of Israel. And this created, and we can actually see this theme in the book of Yechezkel as well, where he has to address this subject of the people of the exile, who's going to really inherit the land, and so on. There's a few chapters in Yechezkel that deal with this as well. I actually never noticed it until I actually studied with one of my professors, which was a big surprise. Oh, right, this is what it's about, and it kind of links all the prophecies to one another, because they were all dealing with more or less the same questions. And one of the major questions was, who is really the continuation of the chosen people of Israel, and who's not? And Zechariah was in the middle of all of that too. And you don't really see it when you read the books until you actually stop and think about it. And what was going on is that when they returned after the exile, after the declaration of Cyrus, Korash, and the declaration, we actually have a copy of the declaration written in cuneiform, but it's actually written, I think it's actually, one of the versions is also in Akkadian, so that version I can actually read. And it's a very generalized declaration, but it's quite possible that that's just a copy, the official copy, and there might have been individual letters sent out to each group that was being emancipated by the Persians. And this is why the book of Ezra, for example, has this letter that talks about the God of Israel and so on. And there's a lot of questions about how come he would know. And I think I have an article on my website that deals with this question as well. It was based on a paper I wrote during my undergraduate, during my BA. And I addressed that question, how would he know? And I could explain that there actually is quite a bit of history there that can be proven as factual. And the letter itself, even if it's a rendition of a different letter, it doesn't change the fact that you still have something there that's historically accurate. So that when they returned, there was a conflict going on. The conflict was between the 3, 2, 1. And the conflict was between the group of the exiles who slowly trickled into the land. Most of them stayed in Babylon, by the way, because they felt very, very comfortable, and groups that stayed here in the land. There was also a community living in Egypt. There was a community developed in Egypt from people who probably left the northern kingdom and fled to Egypt, looking for security. Probably also Israelite and Judean soldiers that were taken down south. There was actually an article that came out. It wasn't a very long article. It didn't I felt it didn't give enough information, but they said that there's some motifs in letters that they found, like prayers that they discovered, that indicate that these were northerners. There's a whole issue there with the bull and everything, and it was very sad because they didn't actually give the letter itself, which was very sad. But it's quite possible that there was some property rights there, and that's why it wasn't published there. Unfortunately, that happens sometimes, even though this is information that should be, public information. They sometimes try to keep these things to themselves, which is a little sad. And the community living in the land of Israel was a community that was a mixture of people from the 10 tribes and people from Judah, and there were Levites living here as well. Not everyone was exiled. I mean, the way the Book of Kings tries to describe things is as if everything was empty, but when you read between the lines, you kind of discover there were plenty of people here. You also had the Samaritans, which some of them were descendants of people who were exiled by the Assyrians. The Assyrians practiced what's called a two-way exile, where you would move people around from one place to the other. But still, for example, Josephus describes that many of the Samaritans were just basically descendants of Judeans that joined the son of the high priest and went to live in Samaria. But basically what was going on was that there was this just ongoing debate over who is really the chosen people, who really belongs to this. And Zechariah is in the middle of all of that. And the people of the diaspora felt that they were the most important. They were the elite. And in truth, historically speaking, they were the elite, but they looked down at everyone. And you can actually see this argument going on between the lines when you read, for example, the story of Hezekiah's Passover, which there is a podcast for, and hopefully will be published sometime after this one. And you'll be able to listen because it was actually based on a research paper that I had to submit this year during my master's to one of my professors who's a very big expert in analyzing text. I mean, his classes were 99% just sitting with the Bible and analyzing everything to pieces and comparing sections of the Bible to one another. It was a very interesting, intensive course in just understanding how to analytically understand a text by taking 3 verses and just pondering about them the entire class. And thank God I got a very, very good grade on that paper, and I finished that course with a high grade. And the professor gave me a lot of insight how to work with text as well. He gave me a lot of very important notes, and I'm implementing those notes today. Not necessarily in this recording, but in overall. And one of the things we touched on was also this issue of identity. So I wrote a paper on 2 Chronicles chapter 35, if I remember correctly, the Hezekiah's Passover. And actually, let me confirm that it was chapter 35. It was a couple months ago, so I have to check. I gave the paper in very, very, very early stages of the course, so I don't remember exactly what I did. No, wasn't 35 is Yoshiao, Josiah. So I mean, it's probably chapter 30 or something. Yes. Okay. 3, 2, 1. So in 2 Chronicles chapter 30, there's a story there of the Passover Hezekiah, and Hezekiah actually, according to this story, invites lots and lots of people from the northern kingdom. So the Book of Chronicles says, look, there were people here, were loads of people here, and only some of the people who were invited actually joined King Hezekiah. And the way I analyzed that text was that the story itself, even though it's based on a real story, has elements in it that also tried to send a message. So try to explain this. When you tell a story, you're trying to make a point. You're not just telling a story as is. For example, especially if you're just telling a story, you're sitting with your friend and you just, oh, this and that happened, it was such a funny story, and so on. You're just telling a story. But when you're telling a story, when you're trying to convey a concept, when you're a storyteller, you're trying to send a message, when your material has real impact because it's the word of God, you still have to build up your information in a way that sends messages. And this is what happens here. In the message of, the way I understood it, the message of Chronicles, 2 Chronicles chapter 30, and the message of Chronicles and overall is that everyone is Israel. Everyone who is part of this body called Israel is Israel. Even if they're not necessarily physical descendants of Israel, they're still Israel because they've accepted the God of Israel as their God. So even the sojourners joined this Passover by King Hezekiah. I think that was one of the eureka moments when I was going through the text. I said, oh, look, it mentions V'hagerim. That's wonderful. That actually proves my point. And that's the thing. So there was this ongoing debate. And Chronicles tries to deal with this debate by saying, look, we have to accept everyone. Zechariah, I was trying to figure out where Zechariah stands on this. And Zechariah very clearly understands, he's interacting a lot, because he sits probably in the area of Jerusalem, and he's interacting a lot with people from the diaspora as well. There's actually later on, chapter 6 or 7, he receives letters from people that are from Bnei HaGolah, from the diaspora, and they saw themselves, this is what they refer to themselves, Bnei HaGolah. Book of Ezra uses that term as well. And he interacts with them, but it's not necessarily that he was on one side or the other of the debate, but he does emphasize Jerusalem very greatly, which is what we're going to be reading here today. And Zechariah is also living in a time where they were expecting the end of the exile to be this big, massive thing. Everyone will get up, and you have all these amazing, beautiful prophecies in Isaiah where you turn the crooked roads into straight roads. Ha'akov lemisho, the akov from akav is to something which is crooked, that you can actually walk straight. There'll be pathways, and they're expecting mountains to flatten down and waterways to open. There's a lot of Exodus type of elements in there. And really, when you read some of the description in the book of Ezra, where he describes they went to the river of Hoha or something like that, and there's a bit of like an Exodus atmosphere there. He leads these people, and he's a Cohen, and he's like Aharon, and he's leading the people, and they're carrying things for the temple, and they're basically, they have this very strong feeling this is like the Exodus, and everyone was actually expecting for something similar to the Exodus. And they came to the land, and it didn't happen. So Daniel sits, and he's sitting in Babylon, and he reads the verses in Yirmiyahu, 70 years, and he tries to calculate it, and he prays about it, and they're in the land. Haggai tells him, look, the problem is you haven't built the temple. When you build the temple, everything is going to be fine. But really, the entire note of Second Temple Jewry, and offshoot of that, Judaism today, to all its different branches, and Christianity as well, to all different things. They use the term Christianity very, very broadly, because I've received comments by people saying, Christianity has no Jewish sources and everything. So I can say a lot about that. We're not going to go into that right now. But I use Christianity as a general term, so don't be offended by anything. If you are of a group that belongs to one of the beliefs, one of the mechanisms of belief in Yeshua, Jesus, Yeshua, whatever. Yeshua, by the way, is not necessarily a derogative. It's because in the Galilee they couldn't pronounce an ayin, Yeshua. Yeshua would be or would probably be the way they pronounced it, or they just turned into Yeshua, and it happened to work out for someone for it to be a derogative. And the problem that they had was knowing the truth. I mean, towards the end of the first temple, they were having trouble. Yirmiyahu has to deal with this as well. But they were listening to these prophets telling them, oh, it's about to happen, it's about to happen. And 200, 300 years pass, and they're looking at one another going like, nothing happened. And then you have all these different sects that grew, like the Damascus scroll, which represents a specific sect. And people were trying to say, look, we have prophecy, we have prophecy, we have this Messiah and that Messiah. And I've already said this before, Judaism and all its branches, whatever branches you go to, is post-traumatic, with a sense of just always hoping and hoping and hoping. And I always have in my head the echoing of Haggai saying, well, you do something about it too. Don't expect God to sit there and you're sitting twiddling your thumbs. There's actions that have to be done. This is why I find Haggai to be one of the more intriguing prophets of this era. Zechariah stands there and he says, look, it's about to happen. And Jerusalem does reach a pretty amazing point of glory eventually. And but it doesn't reach that place that they were expecting. It doesn't reach that place where a king from the house of David rules. And that subject of the house of David by itself is a big, massive mess by itself. But let's focus on positive things. So there's a bit of positive here, a bit of negative, and then a bit of positive. So the reading today, I'm going to be reading the most common reading, which is from, well, there's Ashkenazim, Sfaradim, and Temanim read more or less the same thing. The Yemenites add 2 more verses all the way to verse 9, but basically Zechariah 2:14 to 4:7, or you can do 4:9. I don't mind adding 2 verses. Not that terrible. It's not extremely long reading either. But Zechariah tries to give hope. He's sitting there in Jerusalem at a point where they're only now gathering themselves, they're rebuilding things, and he gives hope, and he says, Roni v'simchi bat Zion. Rejoice and be happy, the daughter of Zion. Ki hiniva v'shachanti v'tochech neum Adonai. For I am coming, and I will dwell in your midst, the word of the Lord. As some will know, I use the word Lord, just again because I'm using English. I'm going to say Adonai as well. But he's saying, look, you're waiting, and it's about to happen. Just hold tight. And he says, V'nilvu, and this is a very important verse, V'nilvu goim rabim el Adonai bayom hahu, v'hayu li le'am. And many nations will not necessarily join, but could join or follow with. It's like the word levi, lot nilve, to be added upon and be with. It says many nations will be walking beside, I would say that's the best way to say it, to the Lord on that day. And that's the thing I was trying to say earlier. You don't have to invent for yourself a genealogy. All you have to say is, I follow the God of Israel. That's all you have to say. You don't have to try to invent an identity. You can still be you. It doesn't matter. Be you. Don't be ashamed of who your ancestors were. Be proud of your decision. It says, V'hayu li le'am, v'shachanti betochech, v'yadat ki Adonai tzevaot shelachani elayich. And they will be a nation to me. Now, he's obviously also talking about Israel being gathered from the nations. I think to me, at least it's clear. But he's also saying from the nations as well are going to join. This reminds me of Isaiah 56, a beautiful chapter. And I will dwell in your midst, and you will know, for the Lord God, the Lord of hosts, has sent me to you. So this is probably Zechariah talking about himself. And now you, the dwellers of Jerusalem, will know that God has sent me. V'nahal Adonai et Yehuda chelko al admat hakodesh. And he will inherit, or make inherit. The Lord will make inherit Judah his portion on the Holy Land. Now, Admat HaKodesh, this is actually pretty important because Zechariah here is, even though he's saying many of the nations will join, he's also drawing a line saying, look, there's also the Holy Land, the holy property. And this kind of puts him somewhere, I think puts him somewhere in between the movement of the exiles, the Holy Seed movement, and the all-inclusive movement as well. And he says, look, Judah is going to return to Jerusalem, but everything else is open. And he says, Uvachar od b'Yerushalayim, and he will choose again in Jerusalem. He's going to return to Jerusalem. And he says, and this is a dramatic point, Has kol basar mipenei Adonai, ki ne'or mime'on kodesho. Silence all flesh before the Lord, for he has awakened from his holy dwelling. He's saying God is about to appear. He's sitting there at the edge of everything, and he's saying, it's about to happen. You will see God reappearing at his temple. But then he makes another point. This is part of the editing. He says, but there's a problem. You, the people, haven't prepared yourself properly. He says, Vayar'eni Yehoshua kohen gadol. And he showed me Joshua, the high priest, the great priest. Because you have to remember, Joshua was one of the Kohanim that came with Zerubbabel. It was Zerubbabel son of Shaltiel and Yoshua ben Yehotzadak. These were the two priests. So this is not in the beginning of everything. This is in the middle stage. This is actually before Ezra and Nehemiah. There was the part in the beginning with Shashbatzar, which was in 538 BCE when the declaration came. And a few decades later, there was Zerubbabel and Yehoshua. This was an intermediate point. And then after them came Ezra and Nehemiah. And there's a bit of a debate in the research who really came before whom. Was it Nehemiah? Is it possible Nehemiah came before Ezra? And there is such a possibility. And it's an interesting discussion by itself. It says, Omed lifnei, standing, the high priest is standing lifnei malach Adonai, before the angel of the Lord. V'hasatan. It's a very, very, very controversial word. So I actually did a podcast years ago about this concept of Satan. And here, the Satan is obviously an angelic entity. Professor Alexander Rofé, which I had the pleasure of meeting, very, very sweet man, has written throughout the years. He's been a professor for decades, and he's a pretty old man now. And I basically walked up to him and thanked him for all the work that he's done throughout the years. He wrote some pretty amazing things. And one of the books that he wrote actually was his PhD, and I actually got to see an original copy. I almost took it to myself, but I decided to give it to one of my professors because I have a copy of the book. It was a copy that he actually gave the Haifa University, and it was a copy he gave Professor Weinfeld of blessed memory. So I had access to an original copy, printed, an old print from late 1960s or early 1970s. And he deals there with the question of the development of angelic characteristics. So by this point, the Satan starts morphing into something a bit more of its own entity, but it's still a servant of God. It says, "V'Satan omed al yemino l'sitno," and the Satan is standing on your right-hand side to cause him to go astray, because the term Satan is to be an enemy. It's to cause you strife. That's really what the term means. So, for example, there was a malach that showed up before Balaam, and he stood there as a Satan, but he's an angel. So what does the Satan here really represent? It actually represents the issues of the time, where even the family of the high priest was involved with characters like, for example, 3, 2, 1. Like, for example, Sanvelat and other people, the northerners. So this represents actually something, probably represents really a person. He's seeing a vision, but the vision is supposed to represent real things in reality. So it says, Vayomer Adonai el-Satan, Yig'ar Adonai becha Satan, V'yig'ar Adonai becha bocher b'Yerushalayim. So the Lord says, but it's through the angel. So the angel speaks in the name of God, because he's talking about God in the third person. It will be, the Lord, may the Lord, and in a commanding sense, may the Lord roar at you. Yigal is to actually yell at someone forcefully. Oh Satan. Okay? And may the Lord yell at you forcefully, he who chooses in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is God's chosen place. Now, what he's actually saying here is that he's making the point that Jerusalem is the chosen place. The Satan here is Sanballat, who's trying to he tried to join Jerusalem, and they told him no. And we later on hear more about Ezra and Nehemiah about this, but this was something that was going on at this time, but these were people who were worshiping in Samaria as well. And this is why he says, Habocher b'Yerushalayim. He's saying, look, the point is that Jerusalem is the chosen place. And Jerusalem is the center of everything. And if you want to be part of this, you have to submit to Jerusalem. So Zechariah is more on the side of the Holy Seed, even though the Holy Seed movement hasn't really emerged completely yet. But he's already putting down the foundation. So it's quite possible that Ezra and Nehemiah, when they came in, they already knew the prophecies of Zechariah, and they used them, they addressed them. He says to him, Halo ze'ud mutzal mesh, for this is a timber, it's saved from fire. This is a remnant of the original Israel. Don't destroy this. He says, Ve'Yehoshua haya levush bgadim tsoim ve'omed lifnei hamalach. And Joshua was dressed in dirty clothing and standing before the angel. It says, Vayan vayomer el ha'omdim lefanav lemo. And he responded and said to those who stood before him, saying, Hasiru habegadim atsoim me'alav. Remove the dirty clothing from him. Vayomer elav re'eh varti me'alecha avonecha. He says, behold, I removed from upon you your sins, your iniquity. Ve'halbesh otecha mahlatzot, and to dress you clean clothing. Mahlatzot is halatzayim, really has to do with a cloth around your waist, but the idea is here really means mahlatzot is to dress him in new clothing. It says va'omar, and I said. Now Zechariah is giving the commands through the prophecy. Va'omar yasimu tzanif tahor al rosho. May let them put a pure, which means a clean headgear. Tzanif is a wrap-on type of hat upon his head. Ve'asimu atznifato, and they placed the pure wrap-on, the pure headgear, al rosho. Some people translate a turban. I don't think turban is a good translation. So he placed it upon his head. Ve'elbishu b'gadim u'malach Adonai omed, and they dressed him in clothing, and the angel of the Lord was standing. Vaya'ad malach Adonai b'Yehoshua le'emo, and the angel witnessed. He's giving him a witness here. He's warning him. And he said to him, the angel of the Lord testified in Joshua, basically against Joshua, saying, Ko amar Adonai tzevaot, that says the Lord of hosts, Im medrachai telech, if you walk in my ways, V'mit mishmati tishmo, and you guard my guarding. So medrachai telech reminds me of Deuteronomy. My guarding reminds me of Leviticus. So basically, keep Torah and keep the temple. Ve'gamata tadinet beiti, and you also judge my house, meaning you guard my house properly and do according to the law. Ve'gam tishmo et chatzera, and you also guard my courtyards. Ve'natati lecha mehalechim ben ha'omedim ha'ele. I will give you ones who walk amongst the ones who stand here. It's not very clear what he means by this, but it probably means that he will have some place with the angels or something like that. This slightly reminds me of kind of Book of Enoch type of material as well. So we're seeing some of early Enochian type of thinking. Book of Enoch is a very, very late book. If you read it, it's actually composed of 5 different books, 5 or 6 different books, and it's a whole story by itself. But we're seeing some kind of early Enochian type of thinking. Enoch, by the way, in Hebrew is Chanoch, just so you should know. And he says in verse 8, Shema na Yehoshua Kohen HaGadol, ata ve're'echa yoshuv lefanecha. Hear, O Joshua, the high priest, you and your friends who sit before you. Ki anshe mofet hemu, for they are great people. You have to understand, by the way, it's important to point out that the sin that he's pointing to is probably his lack of ability to guard the temple properly. You just have to read the end of Nehemiah and kind of see what was going on there, how foreigners got into the temple, into a place where other people are not allowed to. And I think there's at the end of Zechariah in chapter 14, he talks about there will no longer be foreigners in the courtyard, and will be a Canaanite there anymore. There's a whole reference here of allowing people who are not allowed to be in the temple, meaning people doing work in the temple and kind of half living in the temple, people which were not allowed. It's considered to be a desecration. He says, the ones who stand before you are great people. Ki heni mevi et avdi tzemach, for I am bringing to you my servant Tzemach. Tzemach is a reference here to probably the house of David. For example, we have in the book of Jeremiah, it says Jeremiah 23, 5 to 7 and 33, 14 to 16. It says, הנה ימים באים נאום אדוני והקימותי לדוד צמח צדיק ומלאך מלך. This is behold, days are coming, and I will rise up to David a holy tzemach tzaddik, a righteous tzemach. Tzemach means plant or tree, but the idea of the shoot of the house of David and so on. And a king will reign and so on. There's a concept here. He's working off of material that's already known. Ki neha for the rock, the stone. Asher natati lifnei Yoshua. There's a lot of weird symbolism in Zechariah. There was a rabbi who I got to meet before he died who talked about Zechariah, and he said, look, Zechariah, he doesn't, some of the imagery there is unclear. He kind of requires explanations. So this rock which I placed before Joshua, Al even achat shiv'a einayim, upon one eye there are seven, upon one rock there are 7 eyes. The rock here might be the foundation of the temple, the foundation of the house of David, but there's 7 eyes watching it. It's a very interesting sectological type of concept, the 7 eyes watching over this. Really the idea is that there's a divine, 7 is like an ultimate number, so there's like a divine presence watching over this rock, making sure it all works out properly. It says, Hini mefatech pitucha. Behold, I am developing its shape. He's chiseling out the shapes on the rock. Neum Adonai Tzavot, the word of the Lord of hosts. Umashti et avon haaretz beyom echad. I will remove the iniquity of that land in one day. Bayom hahu neum Adonai Tzavot tikru ish lere'u. On that day, the Lord of hosts says, you won't believe how quiet it was here before I started. And when I started, all the noise began. It's amazing. Kimberly, I hope you're finding these intermissions funny. Okay, 3, 2, 1. On that day, the word of the Lord of hosts, you will call each other to under the vine, under the fig. This is actually reminds me a little bit of some prophecies in Amos, and also the words of Rav Shakeh in Book of Kings, 1 Kings chapter, no, 2 Kings chapter should be around somewhere 20, 19, something like that. And you also have it in the book of Isaiah, same thing. Oh, I'll take you to a land that's luscious and with figs and everything. And he's saying, no, the land is going to return. This is a bit of a mocking of Babylon and Assyria. And when chapter 4 says, Vayashov ha'malach hadover bi vaya'ireni. The angel, again, the angel who spoke with me, again woke me up. Kish asher ya'or mishenoto, like a man who wakes up from sleep. Vayomer elai, and he said to me, Ma ata ro'eh? I asked, what do you see? Vayomer ra'iti v'nei menorat zahav kula ve'gula al rosha. So I saw a menorah, a lamp of some sort, all made of gold, all made of gold. Ve'gula al rosha, there's some kind of mechanism on top. We're not really sure exactly what it is, but there's it seems to be that there's some kind of maybe might be some kind of base that holds. Some people relate to the Akkadian word gulatu. We're not really sure exactly. It's a term that's not very clear, but it might be something that's holding it in place, or some people argue maybe it's something that pours the oil into it. It's not very, very clear what it is. But he sees a menorah. It says V'shiv'a nerotea, and it has 7 it has 7 candles. V'shiv'a v'shiv'a mutzakot. 7 and 7 mutzakot here has to do probably the idea of something which is smelted together. It's when the metal was smelted, it all was put into a form, which was actually quite common practice in the ancient world. They'll make a wax form, pour in the material, and then the wax will melt away. They were buried in sand, pack it, make a hole, pour it in, and then after a couple of hours, pull it out and remove take off the earth, and they'll have a complete shape. So that might be it. It's not very clear exactly how to describe this. Some people think that this looks like the menorah of the temple. Some people think it's like a round basin that the menorah was in or something. There is such a concept of round lamps. I've seen them made of bronze. So this might be like a gold round circular tube type of thing. There's actually I've seen this at the Hecht Museum in Haifa University. It's like a tubed menorah where you pour oil into one, oil just goes around this tube. So this might be like a tubular menorah inside a stone basin. Some people have described it that way. It says v'shiv'a mutzakot. There's 7 of them. They're all part of this structure. Laneot asher rosha, for the candles which are upon its head. Ushnaim zeitim alea, and 2 olives, probably olive branches upon it, which means next to it. Echad mimin hagula v'echad al semola, one on the right of this rounded shape, gula. We're not even 100% sure what this thing is, and one on its left. So he asks in verse 4, Va'an va'omar el hamalach hadover bi le'emor ma ele adoni. We don't understand. If he doesn't understand, how do we understand? There's data here that we don't know. I've seen a lot of speculation what this means, but it's really not that clear. So he says to me, I asked the angel who's speaking to me, and he said, what is this, my Lord? It's Adoni, not Adonai, Adoni. Vayan hamalach hadover bi vayomer elai. And the angel who was speaking to me said to me, Halo yadata ma ha'ele v'amar lo Adoni. He says, for it is that you know what these are. He says, I do not know, my Lord. Vayan vayomer elai lemon. He spoke to me and he said, Ze devar Adonai Zerubbabel lemon. This is the word of the Lord to Zerubbabel, saying, Lo v'chail ve'lo v'chorach, not with wealth and not with strength. Ki im beruchi amar Adonai Tzavod, but by my spirit, says the Lord of hosts. He's telling him, look, it's not about power, it's not about strength. It's about God willing something. It's about walking in the way of God, in the way of Elohim, in the way of the God of Israel, and expecting his spirit to dwell in the temple. And only by God's will, because ruchi here can mean by my will. Okay? It's like, for example, ze lo leruchi. We use this term in Hebrew, lo leruchi. It's not to my will. So it might be that he's saying here that your way to succeed, you as Zerubbabel, is not by making covenants with Sanballat, or making agreements with this person, or relying on Persia, or whatever. It's by doing God's will and God dwelling within that temple that you're trying to build. So he says again, Lo v'chail ve'lo v'choach, ki im beruchi amar Adonai Tzavaot. Not by wealth and not by strength, for by my spirit, my will, says the Lord of hosts. He says to Mi ata har gadol lifnei Zerubbabel lemishor. Who are you, great mountain, whatever enemy he has here? Before Zerubbabel, a flat plain. I will flatten you out. Ve'otzi et ha'even harasha teshuot chen lah. You bring out the headstone and great exalting to it. People will say, chen chen, beauty, beauty. It's all excitement. The concept here, I actually now understand why most traditions stop at verse 7, but some also continue to 8 and 9. because it kind of ends, it's like a very beautiful ending. I'm just looking at verses 8 and 9. I'm thinking, if I read them, it kind of ruins the sequence. I'll read them when I'm done. I'll add them at the end and kind of talk about them a little bit. But it's basically saying, look, he says, God is intending to return to Jerusalem. He turns around to Joshua and he says to Joshua, and he says to him, you need to fix your ways. You need to fix this problem of your behavior. Be a guardian of my temple. You, Zerubbabel, descend to the house of David. I'm bringing back the king. I'm bringing back the tzemach. But you need to understand your strength, your might, and all the things that you can do are nothing if I don't will it. And that's what he's telling them. Trust in me and do my Torah. And I will dwell in your midst, and that's how you will succeed. So he's telling them you need to build the temple. And he says, Vayhi devar Adonai elai le'emor. The Lord, where the Lord was to me saying, Yedei Zerubbabel yisedu habayit hazeh. The hands of Zerubbabel established this house. Veyadav tivtzana, and his hands will complete it. Veyadata ki Adonai tzevaot shelachani alechem. And he will know for the Lord of hosts has sent me to you. Because there was a debate, can we trust him? But the main point is that because God has sent him, because it is God's will, it's Elohim's will to do these things. I want to thank everyone for joining me throughout this year. The next recording, as I said in the beginning, is going to be taken from my series in the Book of Joshua. But I'm very, very thankful to everyone for joining, for listening. We're going to continue cycling these recordings anyhow. I mean, it's only been 1 year. Usually I cycle things like this for a while. But I have a lot of gratitude for sharing, for commenting, and being able to do these recordings, to thank Elohei Israel for being able to have the strength to do these recordings. I have a lot going on all the time, so to find the time. And now towards, this last recording is a little late because of the constraints. But thinking back, all the recordings, all the hours sitting here in front of the computer and recording and talking to myself more or less, I am full of gratitude that I was able to teach the Haftarah series. And there are a few other Haftarot which I will record in the future. There's a few for special feasts and so on, and I will do them. But I want to thank everyone for supporting, for those who were able to monetarily support, but for just for those who said a kind word. Even the thank yous are make my heart full of joy that it helps others. And once again, I want to say thank you to my wonderful editor and colleague, not just an editor, a colleague. We have discussions. Thank you. With this, hopefully you'll be able to join me again with other series, with other programs. And until then, Kol Tov.